What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the remote front office. Today, we are going to be discussing one of, I think, the more promising teams, more exciting teams going into this offseason. They had the number one pick last year. Turned out to have one of the better rookie seasons of all time. Obviously, being Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs. So today, we are going to discuss kind of more of, I guess, not win now, I think, is too extreme for it, right? Just based off of you obviously don't want to do an all or nothing for next year. And then if that doesn't work, then you're screwed. But more of kind of an expediting the timeline, right? So I'm going to give you guys two different scenarios that I have kind of worked out. It's not fully set in stone. I've got Spirac pulled up over here as I'm kind of still just due to the offseason, the draft and stuff. Actually, let me pull up a Tankathon real quick to give you guys kind of what I'm thinking draft-wise for them. But, yeah, if you guys like this kind of content, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We are going into – this is draft week. I'm super excited. Still doing a little bit of the kind of draft prep stuff. Again, won't say I'm a draft expert by any means, but I do have my handful of guys, which you will see that bias in this video, very much so. But yeah, so let's get into it. So obviously, I think the best option for us right now is to start with the expedited type situation, right? So I think step one, and if the Spurs are to expedite this, is to do a Darius Garland trade. I know it's been rumored a lot. If Donovan Mitchell stays, that Darius Garland or Darius Garland's agent would request a trade out of just the different spots that he could possibly go. I do like San Antonio a lot. I feel like Garland, before Mitchell got there, showed real promise as being a primary ball handler, as being the primary decision maker, and also a really good spacer. So I know it's not a one-for-one comparison, but how Denver has Jamal Murray, right? Who I think for most teams wouldn't be a primary scorer, primary facilitator, a 1A type option, right? But with Jokic, because they can run the two-man game, they can run the inverted pick and rolls, they can run a regular pick and roll. He's a good off-the-catch shooter, those sort of things, right? I think that's what works for Denver. Obviously, as Wemby gets more developed and more accustomed to the NBA game, I think his usage is going to go up, right? Which means he's going to be in more of those inverted pick and rolls. He's going to be more of the ball handler bringing it up, less of the, let me make sure my guard gets it and brings it up. Let me get the rebound and push, those sort of situations, right? So I think for that part of his development, he needs a guy that can shoot off the catch as well as off the dribble, and you trust in a pick and roll setting. Now, for Garland, I understand he's had a down year and a half-ish. There's injuries involved. There's getting accustomed to being a guy who obviously you started your career. You were expected to be the primary facilitator for that team. You were expected to make every decision possible, right? It was all on his shoulders to make every playmaking decision possible. And then you bring in Donovan Mitchell, who's a guy who's accustomed to having the ball in his hand, right? He is more of a primary ball handler than I think. Not necessarily, we expected him coming in because I didn't really scout that class. But I think as Donovan Mitchell was growing, we're like, okay, two guard, not necessarily a one. Going to be more of a scorer, not necessarily a guy that's going to have the ball in his hands all the time. And that's kind of what he's developed into, right? I don't know if I love him as your primary guard, but I think that's kind of just the role and the usage that he currently demands, right? So I think with Garland being able to go somewhere else, I think that alleviates that pressure, gives him a chance to reset and kind of go back to what Garland was doing. So I saw this mocked in a couple of other people's off seasons, right? And the picks part of it is always really complicated to me, right? Because in my mind, I think it's pretty obvious who the player or options of players are, right? As far as to make contracts work, to make it make sense for both sides. One side is Devin Vassell for Darius Garland. San Antonio picks up about $7 million extra, but they have that on the books right now. They can absorb that. That's not a big deal. The other option would be Keldon Johnson, and then I threw in Devontae Graham because Devontae Graham is an expiring deal. And I think as you're accumulating more picks, if you're Cleveland in this situation, you can take Devontae Graham, possibly the trade deadline, with a pick and maybe get a guy that's more for the end of the rotation for the playoffs. I think that'd be pretty easy to do. The picks part is what becomes the problem, right? because when I saw people doing it earlier, it was for Keldon Johnson, and it was just 2 picks, but they wanted to give up 4. Personally, if I'm the Spurs, the end all be all is not giving up 4, right? If Cleveland says we're not even having the conversation unless 4 is what is given to us, then fine, sure, that's what we do, right? But in my ideal scenario for wanting to expedite the timeline but keep the core idea of what this timeline needs to be, I kind of want to keep 4, and it'll make sense after we discuss the Garland trade, right? So, Garland trade. If it's Vassell, I think it's probably only 2 firsts, right? I picture Vassell as the better player than Keldon Johnson. He's on the longer deal. Keldon Johnson's deal is cheaper, but I think Vassell has been more of a proven 3-and-D conventional level player and would fit really well next to Donovan Mitchell, right? I think Vassell, if you're Cleveland, is the guy you want. Is that necessarily the guy I want to give up? Not necessarily, but I think depending on which way you go for draft, it makes kind of more sense to go with Vassell, right? The Keldon Johnson deal is the one that I would do if I'm the Spurs, right? I want to keep Vassell. And also, you get off Devontae Graham's contract, you move that on, and then you can just really freeze up that guard rotation because I want Trey Jones as the undoubted, he's the backup guard, end of discussion, right? I like his decision making. Him and his brother both are just really good at as far as uh, risk assessment, I guess is what I'll phrase it as. They don't have a lot of high turnovers. They're good passers. They get the ball around. Just sometimes the players forgot to throw an entry pass, and he did really well with Wemby this year, right? So I really like the idea of having Trey Jones as your backup. Unequivocally, you can get rid of Devontae Graham, move on from that, right? Um, for this exercise, I had, when I did the Keldon Johnson and the Devontae one, I threw in an extra first. So here's the deal: if it's Keldon Johnson, Devontae Graham, 8, a 2026 first from San Antonio, because they also have Atlanta's pick that year. But personally, if I'm the Spurs, I'm wanting to give up our pick because I envision us being better at that time. And then there's a 2028 pick that's the Boston pick they got in the Derek White trade, but there's a ton of stipulations on it. It was a whole big paragraph on it. But essentially, it's Boston's pick, right? The Vassell trade, I only had 2 firsts because I pictured Vassell as the better player. Um, so then, therefore, that is why it was Vassell 8, and then the 2026. It'd probably have to be the Atlanta pick instead of the Spurs pick, right? For the sake of the exercise, we will go ahead and do the Devin Vassell one. Just in my mind, as far as trying to keep everything in line, right? So Vassell 8, the Atlanta pick from 2026 goes to Cleveland. Cleveland gives up Darius Garland. That's all that has to be in the deal. Done deal, right? Okay. So San Antonio now has their point guard of their future. They have Keldon Johnson and they have Wemby, right? That is your core 3 guys going into next year. Now, at pick 4, um, for me personally, because I am super, super high on this guy, right? My pick is Stephon Castle. I think he projects more as a shooting guard than he does a point guard. I know in a lot of interviews he said he's a point guard. I understand that, he wasn't necessarily used that way in college because they had other players around him at UConn that could do those sort of playmaking and were those actual playmakers, those actual point guard type roles. But I understand he did it a little bit in high school. I just picture him as more of a 3-and-D guy, and if he can focus on that, I think that puts him into a higher ceiling than him trying to worry about being an all-around guy and being like, oh, I need to be a good playmaker, but I need to be a good defender, but I really need to work on the shooting. And I think all of that put together, right? You have him focus on the 3-and-D part. He gets really good at that, and then maybe the playmaking develops here in like 4 or 5 years. So now your lineup is going to be Garland, Castle, Keldon Johnson, to be named Wemby, right? Because I think Sohan should start in that lineup, but depending on what options you have in free agency, maybe he doesn't, right? And then now free agency, right? You want to be a win now team. So how do you do that? You bring in win now players. Now I don't love the idea of this, but just kind of due to this free agency class, it would be interesting if, say, it's pretty unlikely you get to the OG number, right? It's probably going around 40 million, 3-4 years. Pretty unlikely given their current cap space, and if you're trading for Garland. that you get to that number, especially because Devontae Graham is still on your books, right? It's not necessarily a great free agency class, but I think if in a perfect world, right, if you can get to the number by doing small trades here and there, you go get OG. OG slides into that power forward spot. You have him next to Wemby, next to Keldon Johnson, with Stephon Castle, with Garland. That's a play-in at the minimum level starting lineup, right? And then you allow Sohan to come off the bench with Trey Jones. Personally, I'd be looking at kind of like maybe a Goga Batatste, somebody like that, in order to kind of come off this bench, because I don't really love the Zach Collins minutes at all at this point, right? My big focus, however, though, for this team is going to be wings. So if you don't end up getting, say, a OG Anunoby, right? Let's say OG Anunoby, not going to happen. My first guy I thought of, I know he's like 20, 25 mil a year. That's going to be a lot for what people are going to consider a role player. But I think if you can get KCP away from Denver on, say, a 2-year deal or even a 2+1, right? Either or. 20, 25 million a year, kind of that Bruce Brown deal. And he can come in. Obviously, that means you're sliding people down, right? So you're sliding Keldon down to the 4. Don't love it. Actually, probably starting Sohan. Castle's probably coming off the bench, at least for the start of the year, and then you kind of play from there, right? So it would be Garland, KCP, Keldon Johnson, Sohan, Wemby. You have defenders across the board. You have your guard defenders. You have your wing defenders. You have your rim protection. You have your spacing. You have Sohan who can kind of bring the ball up a little bit. Wemby can bring the ball up a little bit. Garland can bring the ball up. You're providing a lot of different options for the starting unit, right? As kind of a win now. If you can't get KCP, the guy that I would bring in as a bench role would be Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield, I know he had an underwhelming second half of the year once he was traded. I just don't think shooting disappears like that, though, right? So if you can bring Buddy Hield in on a discounted deal, even if it's a prove it deal, right? Say he gets 18 for this year, and then he's got a player option for 20 or whatever, right? Or it's 20 this year, player option for 18. Both sides kind of understand he's going to test for agency next year regardless, right? I would like that because you're bringing in a guy that can court space. You're bringing in a guy that obviously your starters aren't going to be playing together all the time, right? So Castle may be out. You have Buddy Hield out there. I don't love it defensively, but I just think that you can provide Wemby with unlimited spacing, right? You want to provide this guy with the most space possible offensively to see what he can truly develop into on all 3 levels, right? Another guy I'd be looking at, maybe like I forgot how to say, D'Anthony Melton. I'd like him for a bench guy. I don't want him as a point guard, but again, as that connecting piece, he's about 6'5", 6'6". I think he could be a really good connector. Same with like a Royce O'Neal, a Kyle Anderson, Isaiah Hartenstein. I would love for them. I just don't think they'll end up going that route because of the Zach Collins deal. I would love for them to take a complete swing on a couple of guys, but that is going to be for the long-term video, so we're going to leave that one alone. But again, like a Jeff Green, just these guys that are going to be locker room guys, can step in at times, deliver solid minutes, but you're not taking away from A, your long-term cap space, and B, you're also not taking away from the development of your current guys, right? You have your guards pretty much set. You have wings that are in development that at times you probably need to take out a Jeremy Sohan and put in if you can get a Royce O'Neal, right? You can get him for like 10 to 12 million. And you can put him in at the 4. You can take Sohan out. You can take Castle out. And now you have this veteran lineup of Garland, KCP, Keldon Johnson, Royce O'Neal, and Wemby, right? You've got switchability. You've got spacing. You've got a chance to run 5 out. Because I think, I know people are always like, oh, it doesn't matter. But I think we're starting to get to the point in the NBA where you need at least the option for a 5-out lineup, right? It doesn't have to be your lineup 90% of the time, even 70% of the time. But the fact that you have a guy on your bench that you say, okay, I trust you to go give me 5 minutes in a playoff setting, space my court, and play good defense, right? That's all I'm asking for. So that is the condensed version of a quick turnaround. We're competing. We're pushing into the play-in tournament. Here we go, right? Let's talk the long route version of this, right? Let's talk the long distance version. So if I'm the Spurs, I'm not trading my picks. I'm keeping my picks. Here are the two guys that are getting traded, or two guys that are getting selected, right? It's still Castle at 4. I don't care. Still Castle at 4. Now for pick 8, it gets a little bit dicey, right? Because in my mind, I understand this is a reach. I'm looking at Tankathon's mock. Tankathon currently has this man going 15. I don't care. I love the way he plays. Devin Carter would be pick 8 for me. I understand he started boards at like 22. And then there was mocks of him at like 12, 13-ish. Then the Thunder did the Caruso trade, and so he kind of got pushed back a couple spots again. Again, I will admit, I have not watched a lot of tape on this class. The tape I watched on Devin Carter is tape I love to see. A connective playmaker, a guy who may be 6'2", but guards above his size, a guy that rebounds well for his position, has long arms, has the understanding of team defense, the rotation, the ability to get a block from behind, the I'm knowing your beat, so I'm rotating here. The shooting, right? All of these things, he is your quote-unquote point guard. You have Castle next to him to help him with ball handling. Castle may even be the primary ball handler at times. Sohan may handle the ball a little bit. Wemby will handle the ball a little bit. Keldon will handle the ball a little bit. That's just kind of what the modern NBA is, right? Everybody kind of touches a little bit playmaking-wise. And I think you take all of those guys, you put it all together, and you say, here you go, right? That is our draft. So we have Castle, we have Devin Carter. So it goes Devin Carter, Castle, Vassell. I don't know if he's playing your 2, and maybe Castle slides down to the 3. And then you still have Keldon. I'd probably take Keldon off the bench, honestly. And then you have Sohan, you have Wemby, right? No slide against Keldon. I want to see Castle and Carter play at the same time. So then, therefore, you still want Vassell to play. He's about a $30 million player. You expect him to play. So I think all in all, having that together works, right? Now, as far as free agency goes, because again, obviously you are not planning to be, a 2 seed or whatever, but you're planning on at least being in the conversation for the play-in game. That is your goal. If I'm thinking long term with this team, you still have all of your assets from Atlanta. You still have the Chicago pick. You have all these different picks. No need to rush it. Let's take our time. Let's do this right. Let's grab a couple more guys through the draft because Wemby's not going to allow you to be in this spot probably ever again unless he gets hurt, knock on wood. So who am I looking at if I am the Spurs and I'm thinking long-term plays here, right? The first deal I'm throwing out, Patrick Williams. Is Chicago going to match it? Who knows? Throw him 20, 25 mil for 3 years. See what happens. Curious, right? Throw it out there. I think he has potential. I think he is just currently caught in a system that doesn't allow him to really branch out. But what he does is still pretty solid, right? He's still a good spacer. He's a good catch and shoot 3-pointer. We've seen that in Chicago time and time again. He's one of the few guys that can shoot a 3 on that roster. He plays good defense. He plays rangy defense. He plays intelligent defense. That's what you want to add, right? So you can slide Sohan to the bench. You can have Patrick Williams as your starting 4 here in San Antonio. You can have him for years to come. He's, 21, 22 years old? You give him plenty of time to develop within your organization. You trust the Spurs organization to say, here we go. We can take this guy who, at the minimum, is a quality 3-and-D player for us, and we can turn him into a potential secondary creator, even a better 3-and-D guy, those sort of things, right? That's the first deal I'm throwing out. D'Anthony Melton, I still love the idea of D'Anthony Melton. You're not paying him a ton. He's a quality guy. He's a veteran guy. He's been around teams. I want him in that locker room. I've heard nothing but good things about him, I don't think you're getting Isaac Okoro from Cleveland, but with the growth I saw from Isaac Okoro this year, throw him a little something. See what happens, right? Be what Brooklyn was years ago to Portland. Be what the Kings were years ago to Chicago. Be that annoying team that's like, hey, you know what? Let me throw a $20, $25 million a year salary at this guy and see what happens, right? And then maybe you make, back in the day, like Portland had to pay Allen Crabbe $18 million a year because Brooklyn threw him an offer, or you have to pay Zach LaVine his extension because Sacramento threw him an offer, right? all these sort of little mind games that you're playing with teams, do it. See what happens. Um, as far as guys that I would try and get for Sadiq Bey is another one of those guys too. I just think Atlanta has too many wings, and I think it'd be a really good idea to try and go get one of these guys that's in restricted free agency personally, right? Because it's not a great free agency class, so why not swing a little bit? It's not a DeAndre Ayton situation. I trust a lot of these guys to at least be competent. I feel like DeAndre Ayton's just an empty stats guy, but that's a whole nother conversation that we're not going to get into today. Even like a Precious Achua, throw him a little bit of money, right? See what happens. I would also maybe throw Kelly Oubre like a 2-year deal, just to kind of see, because again, this is a team. You're not competing for a championship right now. You're not competing for a second round right now, but you are competing trying to get into a play-in situation, and you need wings, right? Last year, you guys saw my list for most teams. The free agency list was like that long. Right now, it's like that for most teams, just because there's not a lot of guys you need. Torian Prince for an end of the bench guy. I wouldn't mind him here, but that's more of on the win now rotation. I'd be curious if they throw an offer at Miles Bridges. I know there's, again, that's off the court stuff. On the court, he's a solid player, right? He was an All-Star a couple years, or in the All-Star conversation a couple years ago, right? Like, I think it's at least worth a shot on some of these guys for these younger guys that maybe are going to get priced out from the market they're in, or that want more opportunity. Throw them a bag and see what happens, right? But again, that's my kind of more long term. I would also look at Markelle Fultz for the backup job. I know I just said Trey Jones has the backup job, but Trey Jones is entering the final year of his deal. And personally, if you can get Markelle on a, like, say, 3-year deal even, he's 26, right? It's not like Markelle's 32. Markelle's been in the league a couple years. He's 26. Throw him a 3-year deal. See what happens, right? And if you get Markelle Fultz and say maybe you get a Patrick Williams or somebody, you can take like a Devin Vassell, or you can take a Keldon Johnson. You can package it with a Trey Jones or somebody and like a first-round pick, and maybe, who knows, maybe somebody else is on the board that you're like, oh, hey, let me go trade for this guy. Let me go trade for that guy. And then this long-term view becomes a short-term view, right? So I think, in conclusion, right, as we're starting to get time towards the end of this, it's been 23 minutes at this point of me rambling. Thank you guys for listening. But if we're going to get to the point, right, of if I'm San Antonio, if I'm sitting in that front office, which idea am I pitching to our team? What idea am I pitching to Wemby? What idea am I pitching in general, right? I think the Garland thing's interesting. I think you just have to wait on too many dominoes to fall, because as of recording, Mitchell has not signed his extension. Maybe he signs it before I post this because it's just how things work. Or maybe Garland decides, you know what, Mitchell's going to sign, but I'm going to stay because this is my best chance of winning in his mind out east. I just think if you're thinking long-term view, right, and you're thinking, what is the best thing to set up Wemby for his career and not just this upcoming season? Because we all know Wemby's going to be good for years to come. Again, knock on wood, health-wise. But I think if you're this team, you want to have a 5-year outlook, not a 2-year outlook, right? So I am teaching the slow approach, right? Don't trade. The only thing I could think of maybe is if you take pick 8 and you trade with a team towards the back half, like maybe in the 20s. If, say, just trying to look up examples here. If Ron Holland falls, because I don't love him in Chicago, that's where this mock has him. If he falls down a little bit, trade back. Somebody else trades up, takes a guy they want. You get a if Klingon falls all of a sudden to 8, and somebody wants to trade up for Donovan Klingon, you trade back, say, 4 or 5 spots. You take like a Ron Holland, or Devin Carter still may even be there. Honestly, you may be able to trade back with a Philly or Orlando or one of these teams, right? You may be able to say, hey, we'll go ahead, we'll trade back, we'll still get Devin Carter because that's the range he's projected to go, and we still end up with Stephon Castle, and we end up with, either an extra role guy. Like, I would hate this idea, but if the Bulls want to move up, right? And they decide, okay, Ayo Dosunmu is expendable. We want to move up because we're looking at this specific player. So we will give you 11 Ayo, and you give us 8. We call it a day, right? Do it. Why not, right? Because you can either get a Ron Holland, a Cody Williams, Devin Carter if he's still there. It's probably a little early for Kelly Ware, but it's not a horrible idea, right? Even a Dalton Connect. If Dalton Connect slides out of nowhere, right? You can trade back and get him. Sure, he's a little older. Still a good bucket. Still at least worth the shot, right? So that's where I think just having the option to, you're a little more flexible if you don't go the Garland route. Because the Garland route, you're like, okay, Garland's on this deal for this many years. He's making 30-something million. So our contracts are tied into him and tied into whichever of Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson we keep. And so we have a 2-year window to make sure we bring in another high-value guy that's been making $25 million before Wemby's extension kicks in. And you got to pay Sohan in a couple of years, and then it just gets all messy, right? Whereas you slow play this, you go get some guards, you go get some wings, you take a couple of shots in free agency, you see what happens, and you just play it from there, right? I understand in this modern era, everybody's like, now. Wemby had a really good year. We expect to see him in the playoffs next year. Let's go. I still think year 2 Wemby with like a Stephon Castle and getting just slightly better players around him is at least still in the talks for it. You just have to make top 10 in the West. That's all you have to do. You have to make top 10 in order to be play-in eligible. Sure, is that moving up a couple of spots and Memphis getting better and all these teams getting better? Sure. But that's a discussion for a whole other pod in August, right? We want to understand this roster is not going to be a 5-second fix. You're in the playoffs. Here you go. Wemby is all of a sudden on national TV. It's a long-term thing. It's going to take a couple of years, right? Golden State wasn't built in a day. Like OKC, the first time around wasn't built in a day. The second time around wasn't built in a day. Boston wasn't built in a day, right? Like, it's going to take you time. It's going to take you mistakes. It's going to take you misses on free agents, misses on trades, misses on draft picks. It's going to take a while for this team to make sense around Wemby. And by that time, God knows what he is, baby. He's a 25 and 18 player. Maybe he's a 30 and 18 player. Maybe he's averaging 4 blocks a game and winning every single defensive player of the year like he does every year in 2K. Who knows, right? Like, slow play it. Take your time. Go with the road, right? You hit the home run. You got Wemby. You've started what your timeline is. Let's not speed it up. Let's enjoy the ride, right? Let's take our time. So, long story short, I know it took about a half hour to get to that point. I say take the slow road. Make your draft day picks. Maybe a draft day trade. Small draft day trade. But let's just get to where we're at, right? Let's take our time. Let's enjoy the rise of Wemby. And let's slowly make our way out, right? Again, if you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. And I will catch you guys with the live show. Last thing before I go. Draft is Wednesday, Thursday. We will be doing Wednesday live on YouTube channel, my TikTok gaming channel. That'll probably be it. Thursday, I will not be live because it's round 2. I want to kind of sit back. I want to assess day 1, especially if there's any trades. I want to take time to review, and then we will have a Friday recap episode with what I liked, news, that sort of stuff. We won't talk really a whole lot of news on Wednesday unless it's obviously big stuff. But we will leave Wednesday for the draft show. Friday will be a weekly recap, that sort of thing. And then Sunday, so a week from me recording this, is when official free agency opens, is that Sunday night. So the Monday show, I will wait until Monday when I get off of work. And I'll have a list of the signings, try and get as many as I can. We'll talk about it, fits, etc. But yeah, so that's going to be the episode. I appreciate you guys coming through. I will catch y'all on the next one. Peace.